So I was at this dinner party maybe a few weeks back, and there was this woman across the table telling just an incredible story about a trip to Kyoto.
Okay.
And she was completely electric. I mean, describing the light hitting moss in a garden, the sound of a train, just these tiny, perfect details. Everyone was leaning in.
Captivating.
Totally. And she was just radiant. You could almost see her soaking up the attention, just glowing with it. It was absolutely her moment. But then maybe 10 minutes later, the conversation shifts. Someone brings up something really mundane, I think it was, about like local recycling bins or something.
The glamour fades.
Instantly. The change in her it was startling, like a switch flipped off. The storyteller just vanished. She got quiet, physically smaller, kind of sank back in her chair.
Wow.
Didn't say much for the rest of the night, just nursed her drink, kept checking her phone, looked almost hollowed out. And seeing that instant deflation, seeing someone's whole energy, their presence, be so tied to having that spotlight, it really struck me. It wasn't the story fueling her, it was the applause.
That's a really powerful observation.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. That feeling, right? Being totally dependent on, social proof or public praise, it's not just a personality quirk you see at dinner parties.
No, it's much bigger than that.
It becomes a really high-stakes vulnerability when you apply it to business, to innovation, to your actual career. Like, if your whole strategy, your sense of worth, is based on what other people think, you're building on shaky ground.
Extremely shaky.
So today, we're going to really dig into this. We'll look at what the research, the data, the case studies tell us about leaders, entrepreneurs, professionals who lean into internal conviction instead of constantly seeking that external validation.
Yeah, and what's fascinating, I think, is how often chasing that external validation, that applause from analysts, shareholders, the market, it actually pushes leaders into making decisions that seem perfectly rational in the moment.
Right, they look good on paper, short term.
Exactly. But they end up being disastrous long term. It forces this focus on, let's say, building a glossy reputation rather than building real, durable value within the organization. It actually makes companies more fragile.
So we're looking for the difference between just looking good and actually being strong.
Precisely. We want to understand how moving that center of gravity inward, focusing on internal clarity, becomes, maybe paradoxically, the most practical and robust way to build resilience and navigate uncertainty. We're really investigating how that internal conviction fosters resilience, ethical choices, and sustainable innovation, especially when things get economically turbulent.
Okay, let's start in the corporate world, maybe the boardroom, because that's where chasing that short-term praise can have really obvious and sometimes catastrophic costs. There's some really important work that came out of looking at why huge successful companies declined. Giants like Digital Equipment Corporation or even a retailer like Sears.
Right, companies that dominated their fields.
And the weird thing the paradox researchers found was that they didn't fail because they suddenly got dumb or stopped trying. They failed often because they were making what looked like the most rational decisions.
Based on the available data at the time.
Exactly. They were prioritizing the applause, the immediate needs and demands of their biggest, most profitable customers and, of course, their investors.
And this is where we really need to understand the difference between two types of innovation. It's a crucial distinction.
Okay.
So first, you have what are called sustaining technologies. These are basically innovations that help industry leaders do something better for their existing best customers.
Like a faster chip, a clearer screen.
Exactly. Or cutting production costs slightly, things that improve the current offering. And big, successful companies, they're generally excellent at this. Their whole structure is geared towards it. It fits their business model, keeps high-margin customers happy, gets good quarterly reports.
It's the kind of innovation that gets immediate praise, wins the quarter, makes the CEO look good.
Precisely. That's the easy win, the applause generator. But the trouble comes with a second type, disruptive technologies.
Ah, the famous disruptors.
Right. And these are products or services that, at least initially, the company's existing best customers can't really use or simply don't want. And crucially, they usually offer much lower profit margins than the established products.
So for a big company focused on hitting those quarterly numbers,
investing precious resources in something low margin, maybe for a niche market that your big customers are actively dismissing, it looks completely illogical, almost irresponsible from a purely financial perspective. The internal metrics, the dashboards they rely on scream, ignore this.
But isn't that just smart management? I mean, ignoring your best customers for some unproven low-profit thing, That sounds like a huge risk. How does the theory justify taking that kind of gamble?
It's justified by looking at the long-term picture and understanding how markets evolve. The failure isn't usually about bad engineering. It's an organizational failure. The management team is rewarded, sometimes even contractually obligated, to listen to that external voice, the big customers, the financial analysts demanding immediate returns.
So they wait.
They wait. They wait for clear, undeniable evidence that this disruptive thing is actually viable, that the market is really there. But the problem is, by the time the data is crystal clear,
It's often too late. The disruptor has improved, found its market, and is starting to challenge the core business.
exactly, the game is already shifting dramatically. And the leader who tries to invest early in something unproven, something low margin, they face immediate criticism, maybe even calls for their removal. It takes incredible internal confidence, real backbone to absorb that negative feedback, that lack of applause.
So the real vulnerability is waiting for permission from the outside. Outsourcing your long-term strategy to the current mood of the market. That kind of counterintuitive theory-based action, it really demands something deeper inside.
Absolutely. The decision has to be grounded in a strong theory about where the market is going, not just where it is right now. And that needs an internal commitment that goes way beyond the next earnings call. If a leader's self-worth is fundamentally tied to that stock price or the latest analyst rating, well, they're almost certain to choose the sustaining path, even if, deep down, they suspect it's a path to long-term irrelevance.
Okay, this leads perfectly into the power of conviction when things get tough. Let's talk about that case study. Sarah, a mid-level manufacturing CEO, right, in the U.S. Midwest during that huge supply chain crunch around 2022.
Yes, a classic crisis scenario. Her board was understandably panicked by all the uncertainty, and the pressure from analysts to, optimize the bottom line was just immense.
And the respectable move, the one that would get the short-term nod of approval, the tough leader applause, it was pretty obvious, wasn't it?
Oh yeah, massive layoffs to fix the balance sheet immediately, and switch suppliers, instantly find someone cheaper overseas, untested, but cheaper to cut those material costs right now. That was the playbook everyone expected her to run.
But she didn't.
No. She had a different internal anchor. Sarah seemed to understand that those short-term financial optics often mask deeper long-term weaknesses. Her conviction was built on really two core beliefs.
Which were?
First, that true resilience comes from a stable, loyal workforce, not constant churn and fear. And second, that ethical supply chain practices weren't just nice-to-haves, they were fundamental to building durable value and trust. Non-negotiable.
So she refused the easy applause. What did she do instead?
She took a huge personal pay cut herself. Then she went through some really transparent, probably quite painful renegotiations with her existing local suppliers to try and keep them viable. And this is critical. She invested the company's very limited operational cash into retooling one small production line.
To do what?
To use a newly available, but more complicated, sustainable recycled material. Something that required upfront investment and learning, not immediate cost savings.
Wow. Okay, the analysts must have absolutely hated that. Cutting her own salary instead of jobs, sticking with potentially more expensive local suppliers, investing in new stuff during a crisis. That doesn't sound like a recipe for a glowing quarterly report.
They did hate it. They called her weak, said she lacked the necessary ruthlessness. Their focus was entirely on the negative short-term outlook, the hit to immediate profits.
But what happened down the line? That's the real test of internal conviction, right?
Exactly, and here's the payoff. When the supply chain crisis got even worse, her competitors, the ones who chased the short-term applause, who switched to those cheap, untested suppliers, these started facing huge problems. Disastrous product recalls, major production bottlenecks because their demoralized, high-turnover staff couldn't cope.
And Sarah's company.
It was stable. Maybe not spectacularly profitable in that moment, but stable. Her workforce was committed. Her supply chain, though perhaps pricier, was reliable and ethical. Her internally guided choice, prioritizing those long-term factors like workforce stability and material integrity over just looking good for one quarter, it fostered genuine organizational resilience. It actually outperformed the short-term cost cutters when things got really tough.
So her ability to withstand the negative feedback, the lack of applause in the short term, allowed her to build something more durable. Integrity is a competitive asset, even if it's hard to put on a spreadsheet immediately.
That's exactly it. Her durable sense of what mattered allowed her to navigate the short-term pain. Okay, so if established companies need that internal clarity to avoid self-sabotage, you can imagine that starting something completely new, building a company from zero, that requires an even deeper, more fundamental kind of internal drive.
Right, because there's often nothing external to validate you in the beginning.
Precisely. And this brings us to the psychology behind it all. There's a really influential framework called self-determination theory, or SDT, developed by Deci and Ryan. It helps us understand what really fuels people to flourish and perform at a high level, especially over the long haul.
Okay, SDT, let's try and break that down a bit, make it less academic. It talks about basic human needs, right? Things we all need to feel motivated.
Exactly. SDT basically says there are 3 innate universal psychological needs. If these needs are met, people thrive. They experience genuine, self-driven motivation and growth.
Need number 1?
First is competence. This is the need to feel effective, like you're mastering challenges, that you're good at what you do.
Makes sense. Feeling capable.
Second is autonomy. And this one is arguably the most critical for what we're discussing. It's the feeling that you are the source of your own actions, that your behavior comes from within, from your own choices and values, an internal perceived locus of causality, as they call it.
So feeling like you're in the driver's seat, not just following orders or reacting to pressure.
Exactly. You need to feel like you authored the script, not just acted it out. And the third need is relatedness.
Connecting with others.
Yeah, that sense of security, of belonging, of being connected to other people in meaningful ways, having mutual respect and trust.
Okay, competence, autonomy, relatedness. So how does this connect to motivation?
Well, think about intrinsic motivation. That's when you do something simply because it's interesting or personally rewarding or aligns with your deep values. Like that dinner party storyteller initially, maybe she just loved telling stories.
Before the need for applause took over.
Right. Intrinsic motivation is the gold standard, the prototype of self-determined action. Why? Because it naturally satisfies all 3 needs. You feel competent mastering the task, autonomous in choosing to do it, and often related to others through shared interest or collaboration.
It's authentic engagement.
Totally. And the implications for leadership, for managing people, are huge. A great leader doesn't necessarily need bigger carrots or sharper sticks all the time. What they really need to do is create an environment, a context, where people's needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness are supported.
So give people meaningful choices, help them build skills, foster a sense of team.
Exactly. When you do that, something amazing happens. People start to internalize even external goals. A task that might have started as an assignment becomes something they genuinely value and pursue with commitment. It shifts from, I have to do this, to, I want to do this because it matters.
And that probably explains why just throwing money or titles at people, those external rewards, often doesn't lead to sustained performance or creativity. It might work for a bit,
but it doesn't feed those deeper psychological needs. It can satisfy the short-term desire for status or security, but it doesn't nourish autonomy or true competence in the same way. It can even undermine intrinsic motivation over time if people feel controlled by the rewards.
Is there data on this? Does intrinsic motivation actually lead to better results?
Oh, absolutely. The link between intrinsic motivation, grit, and performance is really striking. The research consistently shows some pretty impressive numbers. For instance, people who are intrinsically motivated are about 2.5 times more likely to stick with a really difficult task, something that takes years maybe.
Wow, 2.5 times. Because the reward isn't just at the finish line.
Exactly. The reward is partly the process itself, the challenge, the learning, the satisfaction of figuring things out. So when setbacks happen, and they always do, they don't give up as easily, they're also 1.5 times more likely to actually achieve their ambitious goals.
And creativity, does it help there too?
Significantly. Intrinsically motivated people tend to come up with around 30% more new ideas, and they're about 20% more likely to take calculated risks, to try novel approaches for creative problem solving. They're less afraid of failing because the attempt itself feels worthwhile.
That grit, that persistence fueled from within, that must be what separates a real entrepreneur, someone building something truly new, from what people sometimes call a wantrepreneur.
That's a great way to put it. The entrepreneur is often captivated by the idea of being an entrepreneur. The external markers, the funding announcements, the tech press features, the potential big exit.
The applause again.
Right. They want the rewards, the lifestyle, the image, but they often shy away from the actual work. The relentless, often painful, day-to-day, hour-to-hour problem solving that defines the early stages of any startup. It's messy, it's uncertain, there's no guarantee of success.
So purpose is the key difference.
Purpose. That deep internal conviction that the work itself matters, that the problem you're solving is important. That's the firewall. That's what keeps the intrinsically motivated founder going when the funding dries up, when the market ignores them, when everyone tells them they're crazy, when the external applause is completely absent or even negative.
Which brings up a critical question. What happens when that external validation isn't just zero, but actively negative? Like, the market is telling you you're wrong.
Yeah.
I was reading about a founder in Seoul working on some really complex green hydrogen storage technology. Highly technical, potentially game-changing, but
not sexy in the current startup climate.
Exactly. The ecosystem there, like in many places, was all about speed and flash. AI hype, quick pivots to Web3, getting that next funding round announced fast. Her science was slow, methodical, difficult to explain.
So she was basically operating in an environment that was actively dismissing her core work. Did she get any traction?
Almost none initially. Very little media attention, a huge struggle to get VC funding, just constant market skepticism. And you can imagine she was tempted.
Of course. Tempted to pivot to something trendier, something that would get meetings, get nods, get that little hit of external validation, that confidence boost.
The pressure to just make the pitch deck look better, maybe fudge the timelines, focus on something more fashionable instead of the hard science. It must have been intense.
Immense. But this is where her intrinsic motivation became her shield. She had this deep core belief that this specific, difficult scientific problem needed to be solved for energy and climate reasons. That the science itself mattered more than the hype cycle.
So she made a conscious choice.
A very conscious choice. She decided to stop chasing the external validation game. She doubled down on the R&D, focused purely on hitting internal scientific milestones, making the technology fundamentally better according to her own metrics and theories.
She basically tuned out the noise, ignored the lack of applause.
She had to. She knew, probably from understanding disruptive innovation theory, that her product wasn't yet good enough for the mainstream market. So chasing early approval was pointless. The only thing that mattered was improving the core technology based on scientific principles, even if it meant years of near silence, being dismissed by the venture capital world.
So she built a protective bubble around the work, prioritizing her own sense of competence and autonomy over relatedness with the trendy tech scene.
Pretty much. And it worked. After those years of quiet, incremental progress, guided by her internal theory and metrics, she had a breakthrough. She significantly improved the efficiency and stability of the storage technology. Suddenly, it wasn't just theoretically interesting, it was viable, potentially commercially superior.
And if she'd chased the applause early on,
that innovation likely would have died. If her self-worth, her motivation, had depended on getting those early VC term sheets or positive press coverage, she would have pivoted or quit long before the science matured. Her internal compass gave her the resilience to compete by actually making something better, not just by making a better pitch. Now, the flip side of this high autonomy, intrinsically driven environment we've been talking about, well, it's leadership that relies purely on external forms of control, on raw power.
Right, when the boss leads through authority or threats, not inspiration or support.
Exactly. When a leader's primary tools are their legitimate power, their title, coercive power, threats of punishment, or even expert power used manipulatively. And they don't genuinely engage people, don't foster that sense of autonomy and relatedness we talked about with STT.
They actively thwart those basic psychological needs.
Precisely. And the result is usually significant internal alienation within the team or the organization. People feel controlled, disrespected, disconnected.
And their motivation shifts, right? It stops being genuine commitment and becomes something, well, less healthy, like that idea of interjected regulation.
That's a key concept here. Interjected regulation is when you do something not because you truly value it, but because you feel you ought to. You'd feel guilty or anxious or ashamed if you didn't. It's like you've swallowed the external pressure whole.
The controlling boss's voice becomes your own inner critic.
Exactly. It's internalized, but it's not truly integrated with your sense of self. You're motivated by avoiding negative feelings, not by pursuing positive goals. And this is really corrosive. It lowers long-term commitment, ratchets up anxiety, and definitely stifles creativity because people become afraid to make mistakes.
And we see this play out in real-world management studies, like those comparing newsrooms.
Yeah, those studies were quite revealing. They looked at converged newsrooms, places trying to integrate print, broadcast, online, a complex task requiring collaboration. And the defining factor for success wasn't just technology or strategy, it was the manager's behavior.
What specifically about their behavior?
It really came down to relationship behavior, things like showing concern for individuals, fostering mutual trust and respect, being approachable. As that relationship-oriented behavior increased, so did job satisfaction. And crucially, so did people's willingness to actually engage in those difficult, collaborative convergence activities.
And the managers who weren't like that?
The ones who were primarily task-oriented, just focused on getting the job done, hitting the deadlines, often refusing to explain the why behind their directives, they saw much lower job satisfaction. And less sharing, less collaboration. Their need for external control, for enforcing the task, basically starved their employees' need for autonomy and understanding. Interestingly, the study noted that TV managers tended to fall into this task-oriented style more often than their print counterparts in that specific context.
When that need for control, that reliance on power, becomes the leader's main identity, you can get some pretty extreme and destructive examples,
Right.
like Robert Maxwell.
Oh, Maxwell is almost a caricature of leadership driven by a desperate need for external status and power. He used every form of power threats, his formal authority, his undeniable expertise, primarily to manipulate his entire organization, MCC, to fit his personal vision and ego, often completely detached from market reality.
And his management style reflected that.
Absolutely. It was heavily influenced by his military background. He demanded unquestioning obedience, compromise, critical feedback, strategic debate, not really tolerated. It was about aligning the company to his needs, his desire for a bigger empire, more prestige.
The ultimate form of external validation driving the strategy. And the result?
The result was a strategy based on optics, not fundamentals. Reckless acquisitions, building this sprawling, unstable empire purely to enhance his personal status. It led directly to a crushing debt burden and the company's spectacular collapse. It's a stark reminder. If the leader's ego is writing the strategy checks, the organization's health is usually going to bounce.
But this erosion of trust, this damage from autocratic styles, can happen even in highly successful companies, right? Like Disney under Michael Eisner.
Yes, even there. The issue often isn't just the outcome of the decisions, but the process. There's a concept called procedural justice, basically. Do people feel the decision-making process itself is fair?
How decisions are made and how people are treated during that process.
Exactly. And Eisner's style, often described as highly autocratic, making major calls based on his own judgment, keeping his plans and intentions very close to his chest, like in the famous fallout with Jeffrey Katzenberg. That style directly undermined procedural justice.
Even if his decisions were sometimes brilliant.
Even then, the lack of transparency, the feeling that people weren't consulted or respected in the process, it inevitably eroded trust and commitment. When a leader feels the need to control the narrative and the process that tightly, it signals their own need for control as paramount, perhaps more than finding the genuinely best collaborative outcome. It hinders that vital sense of fairness.
This raises a really interesting point about leaders who are often described as narcissistic. People like Steve Jobs come to mind. Visionary, charismatic, undoubtedly drove innovation, but also known for being sensitive to criticism, lacking empathy sometimes.
Right, traits that seem fundamentally at odds with some leadership theories like transformational leadership, TL, which really emphasizes empathy and individualized consideration.
So how did it work? Was Jobs just an exception, or is there something else going on? Is narcissism required for disruption, or did he have something mitigating that?
It seems much more like the latter. He wasn't just acting alone, especially during the incredibly successful Pixar era. His known weaknesses, that lack of empathy, the volatility, were strategically mediated by the structure around him.
Okay, how so?
Pixar didn't just have Jobs at the top. It had a leadership triumvirate: Jobs, Ed Catmull, and John Lasseter. They functioned almost as a single distributed leadership unit. Jobs provided the intense vision, the inspirational push, that relentless demand for excellence.
The idealized influence and inspirational motivation parts of TL.
Exactly. But Catmull and Lasseter were crucial in creating the actual environment where creativity could thrive. They fostered psychological safety, intellectual stimulation, and provided the individualized consideration, the empathy and support that Jobs himself often lacked.
So the structure buffered the negative aspects of his personality.
Precisely. Catmull and Lasseter absorbed the friction, managed the fallout from Jobs' intensity, and ensured the team could stay focused on the work, on creative problem-solving, without being derailed by the leader's ego or volatility. It shows that you can harness that intense, almost obsessive personal drive, even if it comes with narcissistic traits, if you build robust internal processes and leadership structures around it. The focus has to be on protecting the team's autonomy and psychological safety, managing the ego to serve the work.
Okay, so this fundamental choice, listening to your internal compass versus chasing external approval, it doesn't just play out in CDO decisions. It happens every single day in our individual careers.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's often framed as this battle between chasing the prestigious title, the corner office, the big salary, versus finding work that feels genuinely fulfilling and aligned with who you are.
Yeah, and there was that example of the data scientist, Alex, I think in the London tech scene. Seemed like he was on the perfect trajectory, right? Fast track to head of data science.
The absolute pinnacle, externally speaking. High status, great compensation, the kind of title everyone in his field would recognize and respect. Total external validation.
But internally?
Internally, he realized it was making him miserable. The head of role meant he was spending almost all his time, like 80%, in meetings, managing budgets, navigating internal politics, stuff he fundamentally disliked and wasn't energized by.
He wasn't doing the work he loved anymore.
Exactly. He felt he was constantly having to shape a false self, as the material put it, performing the role of the executive that people expected, rather than using his real talent, his passion, which was getting deep into complex data problems, the actual analytical work. His external success metrics were through the roof, but his internal satisfaction was plummeting.
So he did something pretty radical, especially in that kind of status-conscious tech environment.
Extremely radical. He actually went to his bosses and deliberately asked for a demotion. He moved sideways off the management track into a role as a principal individual contributor, basically saying, I don't want to manage people and budgets. I want to solve hard problems.
Wow. I can only imagine the conversations around the office about that. People must have thought he was crazy or burning out or something. Was there a social cost?
Oh, definitely. The material suggested his colleagues largely viewed it as career suicide, or at least a sign of weakness. They couldn't really compute prioritizing the work itself over the external status symbol of the management title. It just didn't fit the standard model of success.
But for Alex, what was the result for him?
For him, it was transformative. The outcome was reported as near 100% job satisfaction and a feeling of long-term professional fulfillment. He was finally aligning his work with his internal values, his curiosity, the deep satisfaction he got from the work itself.
It really shows that success defined by your own terms, what feels meaningful and engaging to you, creates a much more durable kind of self-esteem, doesn't it? Whereas relying on external things like titles or prestige, that's inherently unstable.
It's incredibly unstable because those external things can be taken away. Markets change, companies restructure, opinions shift. But if your sense of worth comes from the skills you're building, the problems you're solving, the values you're living by, that's much more robust. It's portable. It's yours.
So needing no one's validation, or at least being less dependent on it, isn't just some kind of philosophical ideal. It's actually practical.
It's deeply practical. It liberates your most valuable resources, your time and your attention. When you're not constantly scanning the horizon for approval, your choices can be driven by what actually feels true or right for you. Does this feel useful? Does it make me feel alive? Am I learning something valuable? Is this aligned with my principles? Not just, will this impress people?
And that freedom requires setting boundaries, doesn't it? Saying no to things that look good but don't feel right.
Boundaries become crucial. Saying no isn't just rejection. It's actively stewarding your focus and energy towards what truly matters to you. And it takes real social courage sometimes, right? To stand by your choice, unshaken, whether people applaud you for it or criticize you or simply ignore you.
And economically, thinking about careers, this shifts the focus. Less about chasing the next title on the ladder, more about building a unique skill set that fits you.
Exactly. It becomes less about the optics and more about the fit. Finding the intersection of what you're good at, what you enjoy, and what the world actually needs. That leads to more sustainable career value, less vulnerability to trends and fashions.
It's fascinating how this internal versus external tension shows up even at the highest levels of corporate strategy. Like when you look at how different CEOs apply standard business models, like that Boston Consulting Group matrix.
Yeah, the BCG matrix classifying business units as stars, cash cows, dogs, question marks. It's a classic framework, very focused on financial performance and market share, very external metrics.
And the research found a link between a CEO's background and how rigidly they followed that model.
A really interesting link. CEOs whose main career path was in finance, investment banking, or consulting, they were found to be highly compliant with the BCG model's recommendations. If the model said a unit was a dog and the prescription was harvest or divest,
They tended to follow that instruction strictly, aligned with the short-term external financial logic.
Precisely. It fits the worldview and the metrics they were trained to prioritize. But conversely, CEOs who came up through media management or journalism, they tended to be less likely to just blindly follow the model's purely financial directives.
Why the difference? Different internal values.
That seems to be the implication. Their professional backgrounds might instill different core values, maybe a stronger sense of long-term institutional purpose, or a commitment to the social role of their business, particularly in media. This created friction. They might resist selling off a dog unit if they felt it served some other important, less easily quantifiable long-term purpose, even if it dragged down short-term profits on paper.
Which brings us right back to the unique challenges in the media world, especially news.
Exactly. Because news, particularly in a democracy, arguably isn't just another product line to be optimized solely for short-term profit. It serves a long-term institutional function, a social good. And that often clashes directly with the quarterly profit demands of large conglomerates that might own news outlets.
That's the core tension right there. Short-term economics versus long-term institutional value.
It's a constant balancing act. Managers in media have to find ways to articulate and defend the value of journalism based on those long-term benefits. Public trust, informing citizens, holding power accountable, even when the spreadsheet shows the news division is maybe less efficient than the entertainment division next door.
But does investing in quality journalism actually pay off, even financially, in the long run?
The evidence suggests it does. Studies show that investing in the newsroom, better reporting, more resources, upholding ethical standards, which improves the quality and integrity of the product, is consistently linked to increased revenue, stronger audience loyalty, and greater resilience over time.
So even in a tough business like news, that commitment to internal values, to journalistic integrity, it's not just idealism. It can actually be a source of durable competitive advantage.
It seems to be. While it's harder to measure quarter to quarter than ad sales, that integrity, that trust, that internal alignment with the core purpose of journalism, that seems to be what builds lasting value and resilience in that sector. The internal conviction shapes a better, more trustworthy, and ultimately more valuable product. #outro.
So after diving into all this, what's the big takeaway for you, navigating your own work and life? It really seems that the leaders who weather storms best, the innovators who truly change the game, the professionals who find that deep, lasting satisfaction, they've all cultivated this quiet, sometimes difficult discipline.
Yeah, the discipline of checking in with their own conscience, their own internal sense of value, before they check the reaction of the crowd.
They seem to understand, maybe intuitively or through hard experience, that if your self-esteem, your sense of accomplishment comes from your effort, your integrity, the private progress you make, that's solid, it's durable.
But if it comes primarily from the external applause, the likes, the promotions, the praise, the titles, it's inherently unstable. It flickers. It depends on others.
We've seen it across the board, haven't we? Real resilience, whether it's in a company or in a person, it doesn't seem to come from constantly seeking approval. It comes from that deep internal alignment, getting clear on what matters to you, satisfying those core needs for autonomy, competence, and relatedness in your work.
Absolutely. The real work, maybe the hardest work, is consciously moving that center of gravity inward, learning to treat outside opinions, feedback, metrics as potentially useful data, but never letting them be the ultimate judge of your worth or the sole driver of your direction.
And the freedom that comes from that, when you genuinely stop needing that constant external validation, it feels like that's the space where your life, your career can finally really breathe. It invites you to just show up for your own life, maybe your own small, quiet life sometimes, in ways that feel genuinely meaningful to you, far more than any curated highlight reel ever could. It's like waking up to this subtle, soft dignity, a kind of private clapping, maybe just inside your own head that says you did it, you tried your best, you stayed true to what mattered.